And we're going to bring on our next guest, but while she's coming on, Jean Alicia Elster, I wanted to update you all. Last week, as you all who were watching know, that we had some really amazing information with Joylyn Ross. And so I'm going to tell you about what we're going to be doing. You all said we needed a part 2. So I'm going to be telling you about what we're going to be doing with part 2. I'll do that at the end of this interview with Jean. So Jean, let's unmute your mic and welcome back to Black Authors Matter TV.
Okay, am I unmuted? We all set?
You are. We're all set.
Hey there, I'm glad to be back. I had such a great time. What, I think it was a month ago? I had to come back.
Longer. It was, I think it was a couple of months, but it's time flies.
Yes.
Yeah. So how have you been doing with the book series that you came on to talk with us about before? And then you have a new book out called How It Happens. So
that's right.
Tell us about both and what the new series is about.
Okay, this new series, this is How It Happens. And this is book 3 in the trilogy. And I call it it's both a prequel and a sequel to the first 2 books. The first one was Who's Jim Hines?
Okay.
And the book number 2 is The Colored Car.
Okay.
And all 3 books are historical fiction based upon my family's history, my maternal family's history. And did a lot of research, a lot of oral histories, and How It Happens wraps everything up. It's a story of race relations, miscegenation, sexual assault, class differences, and it begins in Clarksville, Tennessee, in the post-reconstruction period, and it ends in post-World War II Detroit. So it's a large span of time, but it follows 3 successive generations of African-American women. And it explores how these women in particular struggle to overcome the numerous racial and gender obstacles they face as they stake their claim to the American dream.
Wow. So your the first book, Who's Jim Hines? Because I know when you were on before, we talked more about The Colored Car, but I don't think we talked as much about Who's Jim Hines. So where does that, what's the time span for that book?
Okay, Who's Jim Hines? Who's Jim Hines is 1935 Detroit. Okay. And my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, owned a wood business in Detroit. And this is the year that my uncle, when he was 12 years old, he started working for his father. And that's how that came to be, is all part of the story. But he keeps hearing about a driver, because my grandfather owned a fleet of trucks, and he had drivers, and they would take wood all through Detroit and the suburbs. And it's interesting that they would go to the different auto plants. And at those times, the auto parts were delivered in these huge wooden crates. And so my grandfather was ahead of his time. He kind of recycled. He and his drivers would go to the factories, break apart the crates, cart them home in the trucks, and then he would cut them up into little sizes of wood that would fit into wood burning stoves. And then they would sell that. And that was his business. So my uncle, Doug Jr., heard about this driver, Jim Hines, and he never saw him. And so this book talks about just his journey and how he finds out who this driver, Jim Hines, is. And in the process, he's learning about the racial realities of Detroit during that time in the mid-1930s.
Wow. I like period pieces. But I always wonder, how do you make sure that everything that you put in the book remains authentic? Because of course we're not living in 1930s right now. So how do you make sure everything from the way they talked, from the way they dressed, from the conflict and so forth, how do you make sure that that all stays within that time period?
fascinating point. And I'm trying to look around now because one of the things I do, I don't want to turn my back to the screen. One of the things I do, I have a book. It's called Survey of Historical Costume. Okay.
Nice.
My husband is a historian. He teaches history. And at one point in his career, he taught at an all-girls Catholic school. And so to kind of pique their interest in history, he talked about history through the history of fashion. So I kind of purloined this book from him. And when I'm writing, I go through here and I make sure that the fabrics I talk about were used. There's certain dyes, there's certain colors that you are not going to find in the 1920s that you will find now. Had to, make sure zippers were being, just whatever. That's one way that I make sure things are authentic. And then I am looking for it, and I do not, oh, here it is. You talk about the language. You see this dictionary? I found this in my parents' attic decades ago. This dictionary was published in the 1930s. And so when I'm writing something, I look in here and I make sure, was this word even used during the 1930s? Because you will notice if you go on the Merriam-Webster online dictionary, they will tell you certain words that they just entered in 2021 or 2020 that were not in there 10 years ago, or the meanings have changed. And so I will look in here and I will see, was this word even used, or if it was used, how was it used? So it's things like that that I do to make sure everything is authentic. In how it happens, there are a couple of chapters where my protagonist is in labor. She's getting ready to have a child. Okay. And I do not use the word contractions. And my publisher hired a proofreader. They hire several editors, but one of them was a proofreader. And the woman was driving me nuts. She said, why don't you use the word contractions? And so I told her, listen, I looked it up. That word was not used regarding labor during this time. Really? So basically, stop bugging me about it. But I had to, that's how I make, that's one of the ways I make sure things are authentic.
That's amazing that you have that dictionary. What, I can't see the title. It says there's something with the W.
It's Winston, the Winston Dictionary.
Okay.
Who's ever heard
of it? Amazing that you have that as a resource.
As I said, I found it in my parents' attic.
Right. That's
rummaging through decades ago.
Okay.
And
amazing.
I said, oh, I think
don't throw things away.
That's right. You have to.
Right.
You have to keep things.
You're right. That's a good, that's a good reminder that some things need to be retained.
Mm-hmm.
There's especially on paper, because things have gone digital in recent years, but information from the past is all on paper. Or if it's not oral, but if it's oral, then it is just being passed down orally. You don't have a physical record. But a lot of people think that what's on paper is more accurate than oral history, and that is not true. Because somebody can write something down that's completely false.
Exactly.
That's what happens with newspapers all the time. They print something and it turns out to be completely untrue, false. And so, but the people who read the original, they don't know that. And the retractions are always buried on page 39 somewhere instead of the front page.
Right. Well, it's interesting you talk about the oral history, because much of what the kernels of what I base my book on, how it happens, are based on stories that my grandmother told me and my cousins when we were growing up. Mm-hmm. And she would tell us these things over and over again. She didn't tell us some of the details. That was left to us as adults to figure out. But just some of the kernels she would tell us, I think she did so that we would, at the appropriate time, figure out what had happened in her life, how she came to be, and things of that nature. But it was all, she was our griot, you know. It was all, and it was up to us to retain it. And as we got older, and we would, you know, the cousins or my sister and I would talk, and we would say, well, you know, grandma told you this, but, you know, she told me that. She told each of us different things, and it's up to us to put it together. But these oral histories are very important. It's a very important way for us, even today, to pass on things to our children, you know, to make sure that they know it in a different way.
And unfortunately, I think that, and I'm not even gonna just say young people, because I mean, it was like that way when I was young, you know, we didn't want to listen, you know, so a lot of history is lost because we just don't take the time to sit at the elders' feet and just listen. Even if you feel like you have a lot to do, you don't feel like listening, if you feel like they're repeating themselves, when we listen, we retain those stories, and that's the way we carry on our family history. Those things that you won't find in a history book, because these things are personal. And yeah, it's something that I try. I mean, I used to like to listen to my mom tell stories about our elders. I remember a few stories that my grandparents may have said, may have told us as we went down the line. But that is the value of just taking time to listen or reading those things. And I think right now we're in this day and age where people they don't want to see anything old. Oh, that's old. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to, you know, this is new and improved. We can tell our own stories. We can make up our own thing, our own traditions. But then we wind up throwing away the traditions that made us who we are today.
Exactly. That's a very good point. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I hope comes through in how it happens is that, and I have the 3 successive generations, because each one is building upon the other, and each one interacts in different ways, either physically or from memories. And they're interacting, they're thinking, and it's true, you don't throw it away. You don't throw it away. You keep building upon it. And then you have these aha moments, and you say, oh my goodness, that's what they meant.
Right,
You know?
they do. And just photographs are very important too.
Absolutely.
Because going through some photographs after my mom passed, there is a photograph, and she may have shown it to me once, but I don't remember. But when she graduated from high school in 1949, her class, her graduating class, which had about 20 people in it, went to Washington, D.C. for a field trip. And they took a picture in front of the Capitol or something, and you see this black and white photo with these black people dressed, you know, young black people in 1949, dressed up and, you know, hopeful and just, you know, looking toward the future. And she was from North Carolina, so they went from North Carolina to the field trip, and that was a nice photo.
You bring up the photos, because in Who's Jim Hines, I have some archival family photos that I have in there. This was my grandfather. This is my grandfather, my grandmother with their first child. And I'm not sure if it shows too much in here, but my grandmother was very, very light skinned, and
you can see that on you.
White if she had wanted to, but you know, she did not. And in fact, here's some piles of wood from the wood yard that I was telling you
about. That's amazing. You know, the ingenuity that our ancestors had. That's why when I see these young people have t-shirts on saying I'm not my ancestor, you know, my response to that is shame on you. You missed out. You don't have their fortitude or their courage or just their ingenuity and their core spine. You know how patient and how much faith they had to have to push through what they were dealing with. I mean, they had to have some serious faith. You know.
I like the it was serious.
Yeah.
And bring up in one of the points of writing how it happens is because I wanted to show my grandmother, who was very light skinned, how she came to be, this very light skinned daughter in this Black family, she and her two sisters. And, that's what I delve into. She had her biological father, who was a white attorney in town from a very prominent family. In fact, my great-great-great-grandfather was a senator for the Confederacy. And so it was a very prominent family. And he had 3 children by my great-grandmother. And so I go into that, just how that happened and how we came to be based upon that union. So, the history digs deep. You dig deep. You have to consider all the different angles and how it came to be.
Now, is this book historical fiction? Did you fictionalize it, or is it okay? So it's
I fictionalized it, but
you use your family as the meat, as the skeleton, and then to add a little meat in, you have to recreate conversations and events and things like that.
But I'll tell you what I did. Thank goodness my husband is a historian, because he contacted the genealogy library in Clarksville, Tennessee. And he told them what we were doing, and we went down there. And I thank the genealogist in my acknowledgements. His name is Tim Pulley. And when I got there, he had copious amounts of research about my family. He had wills, he had census papers. And since it was a prominent family, there have been books written about them, about the white side of the family. And so I had all this information to base on, just based on I had a couple of names, and I knew, of course, I knew the town. And so I did all that information. I visited the white cemetery. I visited the Black cemetery. I saw the boarding house where my grandmother was, I assume, was conceived. I saw the building where my great-grandfather had his law offices. So all of those things were in the back of my mind while I'm writing. So even though I'm fictionalizing everything, the core of it was there. Right. And I think that adds a lot of depth to it, because when you do that much research, of course, this isn't, I didn't write a nonfiction book, but those things are in the back of your mind, and it influences how you portray things, how you portray people, how you describe. I saw, it was now a parking lot, but I saw where my great-grandmother lived, and where the house would have been. It's now a parking lot for a church, but I saw where that was. So I was able to walk where she walked. And that makes a difference when you're developing scenes or developing your characters. It makes a difference when you have that going on in the back of your mind.
I like it.
Me too. That's interesting. I say this often on this show, that the guests on this show just break my book budget. The more I just, because there's just so much good material out there. Now I have a question. Did your I guess it would be your your grandmother's father, I think. Did he acknowledge them, or was?
Very good question. And I address that in the book, because I have this scene where my grandmother, Dorothy May, is saying, and she gets an obituary. Anyway, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but she said, I have two fathers, one white and one Black. One acknowledged me publicly, the other acknowledged me privately. And I'll let you guess which one was which. Right. But her biological father did provided for her education. And that's one of the stories that she would tell us as we were growing up. She said, there's this judge that every year would send to her home all of her school books, all of her school supplies that she needed for that year at school. And we would say, Grandma, why did he do that? She'd say, I don't know, but he did. And so he provided for her college education. She was a teacher of the colored school in Clarksville before she got married and moved north. So he provided for her. And so, and one of my aunts, I took a lot of oral histories, and one of my aunts said that my grandmother and her sisters, they were able to shop at a particular white dress shop in town that no other Black person could go into, but the owner knew who their father was. And so they were able to shop there. So, I mean, it was something like it was an open secret.
Mhm.
No one talked about it, but everybody knew. And I think if you talk with a number of African Americans and about their, and I've kept, when I see these things in the paper and I see blog posts and whatnot, and I have a little binder here, because my family's story was not unique. You know, it was unique in its details, but the situation was not unique. It happened in the South a lot.
You know, I'm sure you remember Senator Strom Thurmond.
Oh, yeah.
He had a Black daughter, and after he died, she wrote her the book about her life and how he would have her come visit him. And he provided for her education and all of that, but it was, you know, it was in secret. But and she was like, when she wrote that book, I think she was, well, he lived a long time because he was, I think, almost 100 when he died. Right. And she was 60 or so, you know, she was in her 60s, I think. I read the book. It was very good. It was very.
And she didn't see him the way the world saw him, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I remember hearing her being interviewed. Yeah.
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 And that was in South Carolina. So
there are a number of stories like that.
Yes.
And so this is just one of them. This is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, we are, it's very American.
Yes, yes.
You know, these histories are really unique to the United States.
They are.
The way that things transpired over hundreds of years. And I'm glad that some of the stories are being told and getting out there, and hopefully the people who really need to read them, well, I think everyone should read them, but you know, I think some of our younger people need to be a little more aware of their history and not just only focused on now. Like if it didn't happen last week, it's not important enough. And you know, life is a continuum. It's a progression. How we got here, it's been a progression, and it's important to know how it progressed and what happened.
And we have to know on whose shoulders we stand.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
On our own. Anyone who thinks that is deluding themselves. So.
Right. And
real quick, Mary Evans wanted to know what percentage of your book was fiction and which was historical.
Very good question. And most of it is fictionalized. Okay, so the core of it is true. So if you look at the each chapter heading is based upon something that actually happened. Okay. Now I fictionalized it, so I had to embellish it, right? And the conversations and things of that nature. So you want to say 25% is historical and 75% is fictionalized, but the core is true.
Right.
So please read the prologue. And if you look at the epilogue, and I kind of list what's happened, you know, to the different children and grandchildren that came from this initial union that the book starts with. So I encompass it in the facts, the factual, the reality, but it's fictionalized so that it's entertaining read, but I don't fictionalize it so that the historical part is wrong. I don't.
Right.
So you can take to the bank the historical parts of it.
Now, one of our regular viewers is also a historian and writes historical, she writes biographies. I don't know, I think she might write some historical fiction. Janice Kearney, she just had a comment that photos, birth records, obituaries, letters, recipes, and even bills, you know, a bill of sale or bill of
Yes.
lading or whatever, even those can be all part of the story.
Well, she mentioned recipes because I have in the colored cards some recipes. So Who's Jim Hines has photos, this has recipes. And you're right, recipes tell you a lot because there are certain ingredients that people used 70 years ago that if you tried to find them in a store now, you know, you'd be walking around for days. You know, there's certain ways that people ate.
Right, that's true.
You know, we can't even think of it. So yes, I'm glad she mentioned the recipes because that's all important. And I really, in the South, they value genealogy more than they do in the North. And I know you're in Texas, and I'm not sure where you are, Dr. Rhonda, but
I'm in DC.
Okay, so I'm in Detroit, and though we have a lot of libraries and we can do a lot of research, we don't have the genealogical libraries that you have in the South. Because when I went to Clarksville, there was this huge, I mean, just huge genealogical library that I got copious amounts of research from. So, and it's fascinating. So I encourage everyone, when you're going on a trip, going on a family reunion, stop by the library, do some research, look at those census records. And a lot of things you can also find online. You really can.
You can now. Now you can find things online. And sometimes when you look at those old photographs, because in the last few years, 5 years or so, I was introduced to a photograph of my paternal grandparents when they were much younger. You know, I think the picture was from the 1930s. And you just wonder, what were they thinking? You know, what was happening when they, because one of them, my grandmother's picture it looked like it was a professional photo. She was posing, and and my grandfather, he was standing outside in front of a car that was like a 1930 something Ford. I'm not familiar, but he was in a suit. So they may have just come from church. You know, it's those just kinds of things that you think about when you look at old photos.
Well, life was more formal then. You talked about the photo at Washington, D.C. When people traveled, you had shorts and a t-shirt.
Right. No, they were dressed.
Yeah.
That photo of my mother's high school class going to Washington, D.C. on a field trip. They were dressed. The boy and had suits on.
You were representing basically the race.
Right.
You knew that. Took it seriously.
Right.
Always, everything you do, you're representing the race.
Right. Whether it's positive or negative.
And you see, it still goes on today.
Yeah. So we're at the end of our time, but we want to let people we want to let people know how they can get Who's Jim Hines, the colored car, and the third book in the series, How It Happens. So they can get them
website.
Okay.
GenealogyElster.com.
Okay.
And go to books. There's a link that will take you right to my publisher, Wayne State University Press.
Okay.
And I just want to say, books make great gifts.
Yes, they do.
They do.
And I also want to encourage people, if you have an independent bookstore near you, patronize your independent bookstores. Those are great resources. And especially during the holiday season, patronize them.
There's so many good books out right now. I mean,
it's
really hard to keep up with them. So there are some excellent books that we can be giving as Christmas presents, stocking stuffers. If you don't want to wrap it up, put it in a stocking. There's a lot that we can be doing now.
Or a gift bag.
Yeah, gift
Yes.
bag is always good too. I mean, I still put stockings on the fireplace, and every once in a while I'll find something cute and throw it in there so everybody
Yeah.
has a stocking to unpack on Christmas.
Okay, I do the stockings, but mine are just for show. I don't put anything in them. But anyway, thank you so much, Jean, for being back on the show to share your historical fiction series. And we look
Always
forward to
enjoy talking with both of you and how it happens,
happens.
book 3. And I have to come back. I love it. I'll
Please do,
book it
please do.
another months. Thank you so much.
Well,
Thank you.
you for being a guest, and happy holidays and happy new year.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.